Greetings and welcome back to Old Ways Rising Farm. This video is a continuation of our earlier video on planting potatoes. I'll put a link up at the top of the screen. If you haven't seen the first one, I would click that link, go watch the planting of these potatoes so that you know the backstory on these, and then come right back to this video. So we are doing the next stage after they start to grow. Potatoes are not a plant and forget garden crop, right? This is a plant that you do need to fuss with a couple times throughout the year. You plant them, they grow up, and then we need to mound soil on top of them. Everywhere that soil touches the stem of the plant, a root will grow up. I was in here fussing around a little bit earlier, and you only have to dig down. These potatoes are planted about yay deep, about 6 or 8 inches deep. And you only have to go a 1/4 inch deep to start finding roots coming out the sides of the stem. Okay? Everywhere those roots go out, they have an opportunity to produce more potatoes. So the more roots I have, the more potatoes will grow per unit area. If you just plant your potatoes flat and ignore them, you're not going to have a great yield. You'll have a few spuds per plant, but you're not going to have a great mound of potatoes coming out of each plant. The more you mound soil up, the more roots you get, the more potatoes you get. Okay, so we want to keep coming throughout the season and continually mounding it. Now the roots that are always there, those will produce the bigger potatoes. A month from now, 2 months from now, when we're still mounding these things up, those will produce more new potatoes up at the top. So you'll kind of have a gradient of smaller down toward bigger at the bottom. There's a point at which you can't mound it anymore and then you quit. You know, if it's just going to fall over, that's pointless. You quit at that point. And how big the smallest potatoes develop will depend on how much growing season you have from when you quit mounding them until frost hits. And then you harvest at frost. So, we have nice growth and we're going to bury it. So the first thing I'm going to do is we're going to put in a little bit more of my calf stall bedding that I like to use for everything. Potatoes are heavy feeders. You don't have to worry about this being too much. But this is going to be a pure mulch layer, so I don't want it to be more than about 1 inch thick so it doesn't heat. We can go all the way along this row with this nice stuff. Okay. We're going to end up having about a half a wheelbarrow in each of these rows. If you have different length rows, you'll of course have a different wheelbarrow relative measurement. Okay, there we go. There's some nice loose mulch. And now I'm going to come back to these piles that I left when we planted them. And I'm just going to start taking this. And some of that grass is trying to grow into the ground. And shoveling this back on. To build up the potatoes. And it's totally fine if it kind of comes in clumps. This was sod at the beginning of the growing season here, so we're not going to get that reduced to beautiful ground in just a couple of weeks. This is actually turning out to be easier to do with my hands than with the shovel. That's fine. Now, if you see a few of these are a little taller, like these are a little taller, this guy's a little shorter. So I'm making sure, is he in frame? Mm-hmm. Okay. So I'm making sure that the tips of his leaves are still sticking up. And if I have to leave a little hole around him for a little bit, that's fine. Totally fine. It'll get filled up. It'll get filled up. Okay. I'm not going to film doing this entire row, let alone the whole bed, but I'm going to keep going along just as I did here. And this will be it for now. What I just did is it for this week. 2 to 3 weeks, I will come, and in between these rows, I'll start digging down. So at the beginning of this planting, we had a trough in which we planted the potatoes, and there was a mound in between them. Now we have a mound on the potatoes and a flat between them. In a couple of weeks, I'll come back, I'll put another layer of castall bedding on top of this soil, and then dig down, and we'll end up with a trough between them and the potatoes in a mound. Okay? So that's the ultimate progression. And then the last mulching, I'm in a fairly short growing season here, so I can't just, keep going with more and more mulch. The last mulching will be some straw or waste hay or something like that goes in on top, and you'll get some small potatoes in that. But again, short growing season, I don't expect that we'll have big giant spuds in that last section. So this is the process, and you'll want to do this, you'll want to be mounding your potatoes at least 3 or 4 times. If you're in a southern climate, we have a really long growing season, you can just keep going until, you're within 2 months of harvest time. When you're within about 2 months of your last frost, it's time to quit and just let them grow, okay? Also, you want to make sure that if you're working with a material that's not fully composted, that you never get it too thick. I have had that problem. I'm real leery about just giant lumps of straw, hay, mulch, manure, things like that. Because I have used those sorts of materials and I've had them heat and cook my potatoes. And boy, I said, gosh golly gee whizzikers, I wish that hadn't happened. Just exactly those words. Just ask my family, they know. Actually, the neighbors heard them, they know too. So, you want to be real careful with mulch that's not fully composted. Thin layers. So that's why I'm doing a very thin layer of the manure, and then a thick layer of soil, then a thin layer of manure, a thick layer of soil, and then the final layer will just be a relatively thin layer of straw or hay or whatever I happen to be able to get handy at the time that comes along. This is the last video that I'm going to do until the harvest. I'll definitely show you the harvest. But I hope that you like these potatoes and you'll go ahead and like the video, and I'll see you next time on Old Boys Rising Farm.